A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear viewers, to the show Think About It. We hope that every one of our viewers had a very, very, very lovely Ramadan that passed by. It was quite different from the usual Ramadan that takes place, and that you spent time with your families, that you got to talk about a lot of things, you got to plan about your future. It is indeed uncertain when things will normalize and whether we will be able to carry out the same goals that we've had before. But inshallah, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're able to move forward towards prosperity and towards success, inshallah. For those of you who don't have barbers at home, by the way, resort to your lovely wife, to your mother, to your sisters. They do a pretty good job. Just to let you know, think about it. Today's show is about education, ladies and gentlemen. Education is one factor and one facet of life that nobody can deny anymore, as much as they used to in the past. Now, our story kicks off with a young boy named Ibrahim. Ibrahim, 7th grader, sitting down with his father one day after school. His father's driving him home, and he looks towards his dad and he asks him, "Dad, do I have to go to university after I finish school?" And his father says, "Of course, son. When you go to university, you can get a degree. And when you get a degree, you can start working." And so his son asks him, "What kind of degree should I get?" And so Ibrahim's father tells him that you should get a degree in something you enjoy doing. If you want to become a doctor, or if you want to go into medical sciences, or if you want to be a teacher in the future, whatever you want to do, you should pursue that. And when you go to university, there's a very nice way of receiving different information for the skill that you might have and ways to enhance that skill. So this conversation was quite interesting to Ibrahim. So Ibrahim was like, "Okay, fine. So if I do go to university and I get a degree, how long is that going to take me?" So his father responded, "Son, it depends on which country you go and study in. It depends on what type of education you do. If you go into the medical field, it takes a bit longer. You first do your MBBS or MD degree, you move on and you have to do internships or house jobs, then observerships, fellowships, and etc., so on and so forth. And once you're able to do that, then you can become a doctor, and you can also do a specialization." So Ibrahim says, "That's too long for me to do. What if I do something in business?" And his father's like, "Of course, if you want to do something in business, you can do that too." So Ibrahim said, "Once I have a degree, can I become like an owner of a company or a CEO or a chairman?" And his father says, "Son, you need experience for that. And sometimes you might need another degree." And so Ibrahim was like, "What? I need another degree? What do you mean, Dad?" And he says, "Son, you have a bachelor's degree. You can go to college first, do 2 years of college, and then do a bachelor's degree, do a master's. And there's something called a PhD as well. It's called a doctorate degree." And so Ibrahim looks at his dad and says, "Isn't that going to take a lot of time?" And his dad says, "Yes, son, it's going to take a lot of time, but it's an investment in yourself. Because when you invest in yourself, you can move forward, be successful, and more opportunities open up for you." So Ibrahim says that means that if somebody has a bachelor's, they have less opportunities than somebody who has a master's. As far as that's not necessarily the case, but a master's just puts you on a different level. So Ibrahim asked his father one question that was probably one that his father couldn't answer properly. "Dad, why do we have different degrees? Why can't we do everything together? Why are there levels? What you're telling me is that somebody who has a master's degree and somebody who has a bachelor's degree, if they go to get a job, people are obviously going to hire the person with a master's degree." So Ibrahim's father says, "Not necessarily, son, but the person with a master's, it depends on your experience as well." So Ibrahim, confused, not understanding what was going on, the subject dropped, their house came. So they went in to their house. Now, just like Ibrahim, who had this confusion and who asked all these questions, I'm guessing that we all need to think about why we have different degrees. What are the pros and cons of having different levels of education? Does it in fact segregate intelligence? Does it make you think that a person with a master's degree is more intelligent, more experienced, more stable than a person who has a bachelor's degree? Does it mean that a person who has a doctorate degree, a person who has a PhD, is somebody who's at the pinnacle of their profession? What is it exactly that makes these degrees segregated? What we need to do is we need to go back to medieval Europe. We're talking about times when crusades used to happen, na'udhu billah, times when there was a lot of confusion happening, and the upbringing of the European Empire. So in medieval Europe, let's go back to the year 1179, that's 1179. The concept of doctio came up. It's a Latin word, doctio, which actually means doctor in English. Doctio was a license that was given to people who could teach. Who would issue this license? The Pope would issue this license. So you go to the Pope and you tell the Pope that I'm a person who has a lot of experience in this area. I'm a man who works with medical sciences. I'm a man who knows a lot about science itself, mathematics, I want to be a teacher. I want to give my information, the one that I have, to other people. And so the Pope would sign a parchment, a piece of paper, which would be your license, and you'd be ready to go and do what you do good. And that was a doctio. A doctio is when you're able to teach, which today, in today's terms, is called a doctorate, which would be equivalent to a PhD. Now, what were the prerequisites to get a doctio? Not much, just that you had experience. 100, 200 years later on, of course, more prerequisites were added to this. The prerequisites were added were very simple. It was that if somebody came up and he wanted a doctio from the Pope or a high priest type person, a clergy basically, they would have to come up with 5 witnesses to prove that this person is good at what they do. And so, when they would get that evidence, the Pope would issue them a doctio. 100 years later, what happened is that people who had a lot of experience used to go and get doctios, but sometimes they weren't able to teach. You could be very good at something, but you might not be able to impart knowledge. These people were a bit stuck then. And then there was a definite, visible difference between everybody who had a doctio. This person is a good teacher. This one, not really. But he does have the experience to show that he can do it. So then a new license was issued called magister. Magister is something that was given to people who could do. So then issues of licenses were given out for people who did and for people who taught. A magister today is known as a master's degree. These were both equivalent because in one area you're teaching and in the other you're doing. But what ended up happening was that a few hundreds of years later, let's go to, let's say, the 18th century when it was about 1700 and plus. People had doctios, people had magisters. And then a university in France, in fact, was given an authorization by the Pope to actually issue academic degrees. So they came up with something called the baccalaureate. The baccalaureate is basically the bachelor's degree that we have today. That ended up becoming something that was a license for people to be apprentices. Apprentices means that you're not very good at doing right now, neither are you that good at teaching. You're just at the beginning level. So this is an apprenticeship license where you can go out and gain experience until you'll be qualified enough to have those 5 or 6 or how many people that you need as evidence to get yourself a doctio or a magister licensed. So basically, this is where it all began. Let's fast forward a few hundred years later. What ended up happening is the baccalaureate, or baccalaureate, as some people say, the bachelor's degree, it became a prerequisite. And people started doing a baccalaureate, and they were actually good, and they couldn't get a doctio. Not everybody can go to the Pope. Not everybody can go to a high person and get a license. They would have to wait, because a lot of people would be trying to get it. You would have a huge line and a waiting list to get yourself an audience, to get yourself one of those licenses. So what universities ended up doing is they ended up allowing people to work after they had a baccalaureate, a bachelor's degree. When this happened, universities thought to themselves, and they said that, wait a second, when it comes to magister and decio, it means that in one area somebody can do something, and in the other somebody can teach it. If you do something, you're a benefit to society, and you're able to teach people, do things for people. But if you teach people and you have a decio, that would actually mean that you're benefiting the future. And people, once you're gone, inshallah khair, people that will come after you, the next generations, would actually be able to implement what you've taught. So they staggered it up and they made it into a bachelor's degree, a master's, followed by a PhD. And then later on in life, you fast forward onto the 20th century from 1900 onwards, where different diplomas and certifications were introduced to people. Now, those diplomas and certifications are also a good way to get a license to do work and move on. But so we have baccalaureate, we have magister, and we have decio. What did they cost way back then? Dear viewers, nothing. They were absolutely free. They didn't cost a single penny until an educational institute known as a university was authorized to issue these licenses. So when they were authorized to issue these licenses, they're like, we need to monetize this somehow. So they started charging people. At that time, even charging a silver coin for a whole degree, a whole system of getting an issued license at the end was a pretty big deal. Many people couldn't afford it back then because they thought that it was too much. Slowly but easily, it did become into what some people refer to today as a business. So one aspect of looking at this, the way Ibrahim has a few questions in his mind, and today for all those children who are like Ibrahim, in his shoes, let's have a look at those two different aspects. Every coin has two sides. Some people have complaints, some people have solutions and reasons for why they exist. Today, education has become expensive indeed. Whether you be sending your child to a private school, which you're paying for, if you send them to a government one, obviously the government's helping you, you're not paying much on that. But not every country has that option for people and children. Not every country gives you free education. So if you're in a country that does provide you free education, you have to be grateful for it. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts you in a place where you have a lot of opportunity to grow without having any kind of a fee or, let's say, a debt hanging over your head. Now, degrees, yes, definitely have grown. They've become more expensive. Things have changed over the past. And every single year, things are still changing. People are increasing the tuition fee that people take for bachelor's degrees, masters, or PhDs. Today's child, when they go to study in university, when they want to go and get a degree, what are the things that they need to do? Number one, they need to find out a way of how they're going to pay for the tuition fee. Granted, some parents have money put away. Some governments, such as the Canadian government, I'm not sure about the American one, but I'm sure they have a similar system. The government provides you some kind of a project or a scheme where you put in a certain amount of money for your children and the government equals it, doubles it, does whatever it is. It stays there for a good amount of time until your child is at a stage where they can go and get tertiary higher education. And they can withdraw the fund and use it for their education, which is great, but not every country has that. Many countries around the world don't have that. In fact, recent statistics and research show that only 3% of countries in the world have such a scheme. That means 97% of the world is still facing a very big hardship, a difficult time. So what do students do usually? You go to university, you have to get a part-time job as well. In fact, I remember quite clearly while I was growing up as well, I've heard a lot of those stories from uncles and aunties and people, elders, adults, at dinner parties or even at conferences or even at school. You get somebody who's a successful person who stands on the stage and podium and gives out a pretty good speech. They all mention that they used to work and study. They used to work, pay for their education. They used to go up front and do something. And they blame the current generation and the generations to come, inshallah khair, but they blame the current generation specific for being lazy, for being egocentric, for being self-involved, and for being entitled. This is something that we talked about previously in Ramadan as well. And they say that because of these features that the new generation has, the current generation has, these are the hindrances that you have. There's nothing else. You guys just don't want to do. Is that true? Let's find out. So I have with me over here some very, very, very staggering statistics and information. I'm sure a lot of people have talked about this before. I'd just like to bring this up again. The cost of a bachelor's degree, an undergraduate degree, right now in Canada for a Canadian citizen is close to about $6,500 a year. And for a graduate degree, it's about $7,000 odd. For international students who would come and study in the US or in Canada, it ranges between, in US dollars, $22,000 a year. In Canada, it's about 29,700 something, which is quite staggering. How do you come up with that money? Some families might be able to afford it, but not everybody. You get a part-time job. Now let's have a look at the past. Let's have a look at these successful people or these people who sometimes blame the current generation for being lazy or not as struggling or active as the previous generation. The current generation says that they worked and they paid off their entire tuition fee. Let's go to 1988 and let's take a look at one of the presidents of the US, Barack Hussein Obama. He's a man who graduated from Harvard and he studied Harvard Law. Excellent. Hats off to that person. At the time when he worked, the minimum wage was around $10 to $11. He was able to go to work 5 days a week, part-time job, not full-time, part-time. And at the end of the whole year, he was able to make he was able to make $22,880 at the end of the year. How much was his tuition fee? He studied in Harvard. Mind you, Harvard is an expensive university. Back in 1988, what was their cost? $17,100 for the whole year. After taxes, Barack Hussein Obama was pocketing $20,900. That means he still had $3,000 to spare, and he could pay for his education. Today, you go to Harvard or a big Ivy League school or university. In fact, not even Harvard or Ivy League. Nowadays, a lot of universities, because of the same standard of education they have, they charge pretty much the same, depending on whatever it is, because there's a standard involved now. Nowadays, in 2020, if a child wants to go to university, they have to pay tuition fee $44,000 plus. Okay, $44,000 plus. You'd think that, okay, now minimum wage might be higher. You think that a child could still afford it. If a child takes a part-time job for 5 days, the same situation that we're putting our previous president Barack Hussein Obama in, that person would have to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, to pocket $22,880. That means that that person is still $14,000 short, if not more. If not more. And after taxes get cut, that person's pocketing even less than that. But let's have a look. What if that person has to go on and do 8 or 7 days a week? I'll tell you about the statistics after this short break. Take care, stay tuned, think about it.
Dame Drops told us how good Popeye's buttermilk biscuit shrimp is without us even asking.
So crunchy, buttery, just like those biscuits. Are you hungry yet?
8 shrimp, a side, and a biscuit for just $6.99.
At KM 9000 sang about Popeye's buttermilk biscuit shrimp because he was feeling it.
Shrimp, 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 shrimp. Shrimp, 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 shrimp.
8 shrimp, a side, and a biscuit for just $6.99.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers. We left off talking about the predicament that the current generation is facing when it comes to educational expense. The previous generation might quote that they worked and studied at the same time and they achieved off their own strength, power, diligence, and resilience. Very good. Can that formula be used today? We talked about Barack Obama, a president who studied law from Harvard, an Ivy League school, a very high and prestigious one, in fact, arguably one of the best universities in the world. So Barack Hussein Obama had to pay $17,100 a year for his tuition. If he had worked part-time, that doesn't mean full-time, part-time, 5 days a week, he would be able to make $22,000. And after taxes, he'd still get $20,000, which means that he would have $3,000 remaining, even after he had paid his tuition fee. Today's generation in 2020, it costs around about, let's say on average, at a university, $44,900 to get an education. If a child today goes and does a part-time job for 5 days a week, yes, minimum wage has increased, so they're pocketing about $30,000, not pocketing, but the total income that they're making is about $30,000. And after taxes, that goes down to $26,000. They're still $18,000 short. So that formula of the past can't be used today. Taxes are different, and schools and universities have hiked up their fees. If that child were to work 7 days a week, that student is working 7 days a week, not 5, they would still be making about $40,000, which is pretty good. After taxes get cut, they're still about $4,000 to $8,000 short. So today, a child who wants to get an education has a more difficult time to face. Having one job won't do it. Maybe having two will just wear you out. You won't be able to give time to your education, and God knows what's going to happen. Here is where we talk about loans. Loans, scholarships, fundings, bursaries, all these things are not a very old phenomena. Back in medieval times and up until 1700s, 1800s, education was for free. But funds, loans, and bursaries came out. Universities provide them, governments provide them, there are different private entities that provide them. They provide them to ease the pain that students have today. Granted, it's a great way to get immediate education, but what ends up happening? I'd like to share with you some other staggering numbers for this. Currently in Canada, if you compare, 2006, there were about 28.5% people, the population that was receiving higher education. That means after high school, degrees, diplomas, and so on. Today, it's about 54%, which is a great jump. It's an amazing increase. But is it healthy or is it binding that individual? Now, universities provide loans at times. Private entities provide loans. In 2006, the loans that students have on top of their heads is that after they graduate, they work, they give a portion of their salary, or they build some kind of fund, they do something to repay the money back to the entity that provided them the loan or the fund to begin with. In Canada, it takes approximately 5 to 15 years for people to pay that loan back. A scholarship is different. A scholarship is somebody appreciating and acknowledging your quick wit or your talent in a specific subject and line, and you get to study. A scholarship is a percentage that is off. You could also have a full-way scholarship. Good for those people who did this. A huge hats off to them. You're excellent at your field. Keep it up. Make this world a better place. Become a benefit to society. But let's talk about the other half, such as myself. We need loans to move on. 5 to 10 years, 15 years to pay back a loan is not a very little time. You have to work a lot, you have to put in those hours, and you have to pay them back. The debt in 2006 that Canadians had on top of their head when they had loans was about $2.6 billion. That's a lot of money. 2016, $18.2 billion. So that means the loans have increased. So that means people who are going into education are actually getting into a debt, which might not be healthy for them. It's definitely going to make their lives a bit difficult, and they're definitely going to have to try to move forward using some form or something that might help them. In the USA, the situation is a bit worse. When I say a bit, I'm being polite. In 2006, 22.7 people were up there receiving education. Great. 2016, 31.5%. Now granted, it doesn't seem like a huge hike compared to Canada, but then they have over 300 million of population while Canada is 30 million plus. So their numbers are still a bit more. The debt in the USA was about $42.5 billion in 2006. Today, the education industry, the people who provide loans to students, that industry itself, just off of debt that people have to pay back, is standing at $1.5 trillion. And this is, you can find this out in the New York Times. You can go and Google it and find it out. There are a lot of resources that will make you shocked to look at these numbers. In the US, it takes around 30 to 40 years to pay that debt back. That means by the time your hair is gray and you're old, you're still paying your debt back. But let's have a look at this. We've talked about how difficult education is, and mainly we've focused on the educational expense. So the money that's going into it, the money that you're raising for it, the fact that you might not have a fund by the time you're 18, 19, 17 to go to university. For those countries and those people who don't have that kind of money, and a child really wants an education, education is your right. You are allowed, if you want to go and do a bachelor's degree, there's nothing that stops you, it's your right. You want to do a master's, it's nothing that stops you, it is your right. You want to go further than that, have a PhD? You guessed it, it's your right. Now there are difficulties, indeed. Let's talk about the flip side, the other side of the coin. So these are the complaints that people have and the comparisons that they put in. Modern day research in Europe, North America, Asia, about 5 different continents altogether. They've shown that brain development is exactly the same as it was in the past. The human being doesn't change. So to have a segregation between a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a PhD is actually healthy for human beings today. Why is that? Sure, back in the day it was a license that you could take with no formal need of education, just on the strength of experience. When you're in school, when you're in grade 1 or kindergarten and you gradually go up to grade 12, you're learning science, math, literature, languages, and all these different things. You're learning them chronologically. You're learning them how so that in grade 1, whatever you learn, grade 2 compounds it. It adds to it. And so on and so forth until you reach a certain grade where sometimes we have elective subjects which kind of prepare us for college, university life, and so on. But university itself is a bit different. Modern day scholars, people who are researchers, such as the name of David Crystal, you can go search that up. He's a very big linguist and he's a very big authority when it comes to certain educational aspects in language. You have people as Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is a man who's quite aged and he has a lot of different input and research that he's done for the educational system. Many people explain tertiary education, which means university education, the 3 different parts that you have, in this manner. They say that when you do a bachelor's degree, it's to check your discipline. So you're told that these are some authors who wrote some books. What you have to do is you have to follow these books, and based on the formulas, the principles that have been mentioned, you have to answer questions, you have to do assignments or projects. And based on how good you are with those, you'll succeed and get a grade. And that's a bachelor's degree. A bachelor's degree develops a discipline within a skill. When you want to do a master's degree, it changes the entire concept and the way of thought. In a master's degree, those books that were told to be, let's say, solid and you have to follow them, they become questionable. So in a master's degree, you're actually doing more analysis than anything else. You're analyzing things around you. So you're analyzing how this author, this book came up with that idea, how it might be right, how it might be wrong. And you try to prove them, your point, whether they're right or wrong. And then at the end of the day, when you want to go up and do a PhD, it actually makes sense that you have some books that you follow, you have those same books that you question. In a PhD, you become a person who has the tools, the understanding, the mind, the experience to actually become a person who makes a book like that people have to follow. So that's the segregation of degrees. Where do you stand? Do you think it's still negative? Do you think it is positive? Is there a reason or rationale behind it? Think about it. Now when it comes to expenses, costs are obviously an issue. Universities hike up their costs or they lower them. It's based on their discretion, their understanding of the market, and their revenue that they have to create. They have staff, they have books, they have dorms, they have a lot of things that they have to pay for. Obviously, you need to give them the amount of money or you need to make sure that they are sustainable so they could actually continue to give the service that they're giving of education to all people around the world who want to come to that particular university. Now that's something that we can't really debate about how expensive a school is or how cheap they are. But what we can look at is is the actual funding that's involved. Granted, loans today do put you in debt, but what they do is they give you immediate access to get into education. And when you get into education, you're able to go forward, maybe get a better job, expand your opportunities, no doubt, and become a professional in this world. Yes, you're going to be paying it back. But in a world like this, where you have all these other types of debts going on, where people have mortgages, where people have cars on lease or finance, any which way, where they're paying loans off or debts off that they've taken off family members or people or friends, this is a system that is available that facilitates you and your educational goals and needs. So, dear viewers, at the end of the day, the educational expense from the time when degrees came out to right now, it's up to you to decide. Is it positive? Is it negative? Do you want to go on that venture? The advice is, and hats off to all those people who've actually done everything, people who are PhD professors today. Gentlemen and ladies, we have utmost respect for you. You've done a great job. Hats off to yourself. Pat yourself at the back as well. We have to keep progressing in life. We have to make sure that we find windows of opportunities, make our own opportunities if we can, and move further. If it's good or bad, that's up for you to decide. Think about it. Thank you very much for tuning in. See you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.